Woodrow Wilson wrote about Princeton in the nation's service. He also wrote about the American Revolution as not a repudiation of the British way, but as a protection of it, a preservation of it. Now, today, 100 years later, the Americans and the British ride on white horses into the Middle East against terror. But isn't the terror in the Middle East our own doing? The Socratic method is a search for the truth. Well, what is the truth? We don't have to look far. Americans per capita use 3 times the amount of energy as any Western industrialized nation, and 10 times as much energy as a third world country. The other fact is that the Middle East is rich in oil.
Sir, with all due respect, can we get to the question?
Isn't this really a question of British colonialism in the Middle East, a dividing of the Middle East for resources?
Are you asking me?
Anybody. I mean, the question is the debate, the so-called debate that goes on in politics, not really just a battle for the hearts and minds, and not really a Socratic debate. And speakers that are prominent that come to Princeton and talk, aren't they really battling for the hearts and minds on just a different level? Is that a Socratic debate? Isn't the truth well known?
Well, I'll answer quickly by saying what's going on in universities today, what goes on in the media, what goes on in the talk shows, even talk radio, is very much part of it's propaganda, it's setting the stage, it's getting the public to back you, it's getting the Congress to back you. That's why we have lobbies. It's not just defense industry and drug industry. There are foreign policy lobbies that spend a lot of money and a lot of time to get people to think about things in certain ways. So all of this is part of how a society, in our case an imperial society, is able to pursue those policies. And if you'll notice, we've just been asked to give huge more funds to the Pentagon, and funds are being taken away from just about everything else in our society.
I mean, there's no doubt that the Middle East would have a different history if they had an abundance of artichokes rather than oil. I mean, we're talking about power, we're talking about resources, we're talking about corporations, we're talking about profits, and we're talking about sustaining ecologically dangerous ways of life that most of us are complicit with. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, sir.
I must disagree with the idea that somehow the focus here should be Dean Slaughter's comment about Secretary Rice, or even Princeton's supposed favoring of administration figures or establishment figures, or however you want to term it. I think the more important question here is something that was brought up in an earlier question about the students at institutions like this and across the country, and our attitudes and the way we interact with figures of authority. Professor West, you brought up the concept of celebrity worship. I would say that this forum, as excellent as it has been, is in fact a form of celebrity worship. And I think...
You're not worshiping us, though, huh?
There wouldn't be this many people in the room if you weren't in the numbers that you are.
But that's not worship, that's showing up.
Well, but the problem is that despite what you can say about, Socratic dialogue, that does not occur among people of my age. And it does not occur outside of fora like this, which are dominated by people like yourself and Dean Slaughter. And that's a wonderful thing. It's great to hear these statements from people like yourselves. But my question is, how can you really inculcate this sort of desire for critique and desire for spontaneous critique, moreover, not simply a reaction to already established figures in younger people?
One is that I find, though, my dear brother, that my travels across the country, there's a number of different organizations of young people, some of whom don't know who I am, but involved in high-quality Socratic reflections on their situation. The New York Underground Railroad and black colleges, I was just there this past weekend, think tanks all around the country. The challenges in Seattle a few years ago, young people, there was no celebrities leading that march against corporate globalization. Those young people were vanguard, activists, good citizens in that regard. So I don't want to, when I hear, I say, well, we young folk have no Socratic energies, and no, I don't believe that's true. The students who brought us together involved in Socratic activity. Do we have enough? Absolutely not. Now, given the fact we live in a market-driven, celebrity-obsessed culture, the question becomes, are there going to be enough so-called celebrities? And remember, Socrates was rendered on stage by Aristophanes, right? He was already a celebrity in that sense, well known publicly. He used his celebrity for critical ends and aims. That's a choice that every citizen has, every person has. You can revel in it, or you can give. And it's a challenge in that regard. So the question is, if we can bring a number of people in, fine, and when you bring them in, you demystify all kinds of talk about worship. Right? You got some names that are well-known, Marie, and Mark well-known, too. You won't forget about this, brother. You're here for the dialogue. We're not here for any worship, uncritical acceptance, allegiance, blindness, and so forth. No, this is for dialogue. If we can bring more in, fine, but you're just showing up. Once you get here, dialogue begins. Yeah.
A first-year graduate student at the Woodrow Wilson School, I was very troubled to read the Wall Street Journal article this morning. Not, first of all, because I fear for the future of my fellowship, but secondly, because I'm very troubled by the direction that the school appears to be going in. I came to the school with a background in local government and international development, and I have found precious few opportunities for me here in terms of coursework. And I know that this is a feeling that's shared by a lot of fellow students who have the same background. And you said, you know, you invite people like me and to come to the school, but we're not being fed. And I want to know if this is, this is the direction that the school is going in. Is it because it seems to me that it's becoming more of a school of foreign service or a school of security studies. The course offerings for this past semester really, to me, resembled something like the Bush budget, where there was quite a few in the security area, and not enough in what, in my mind, public service is a lot more than that. And I wonder, what your response is to that.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. We've hired, I think, 15 people since I've gotten here, and of those, I would say 6 to 7 have been in international relations, and the rest have been across the board. And this year we voted a new certificate in urban policy and urban planning, and I created the Policy Research Institute for the region, which is entirely devoted to regional issues and local government. I'm very sorry to hear about the specific courses, but my definition of government and the Woodrow Wilson School's interpretation of government is local government, state government, federal government, and international government. So this is not a statement about needing to go to Washington and needing to go to the State Department. We have a particular emphasis at the graduate level on federal government careers and foreign affairs, but that covers pretty much the entire federal government these days, and that's a particular emphasis. I remain as committed to training people for all levels of government, and that also assumes they're not going to spend their whole careers there. They're going to spend time in NGOs, some may go into the private sector. So to the extent there is a problem, it is a temporary problem and one we want to rectify.
Yes, I'd like to ask all of the 4 panelists a simple yes and no question. The question is, have they read from cover to cover the book called Empire the People?
No.
So easy, no.
Are we missing out on something?
Including the moderator. In this book by Tony Brown, 1998, he talks about the Illuminati. I'd like to ask each of the 4 people, why do I not hear anything about this group? And if they know anything, could they please comment on it in light of the comments of getting to the truth. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's really a subject for another conference and probably not at Princeton.
Oh, no, we talk about the Illuminati in courses, and it's actually interesting, but I think it's not as germane to this panel as some of the other questions. So I think we should move on.
And other people...
Sir? I think you've asked your question. Could we move on, please? Okay. Thank you.
Hey, sorry, I'll try to be quick. My question is directed to Mr. Brzezinski. I hope I didn't butcher your name. I admire a lot of what you've been trying to do, taking a very different position from the other two speakers. However, you've made some very serious accusations about Dean Slaughter and the administration being players in a political and financial power game, and I don't think you've backed up those claims with evidence. There's a fantastic book by Todd Gitlin called The Twilight of Common Dreams. He talks a lot about the far left and how it's ripped apart the liberal consensus with this kind of paranoia and fear that more moderate people on the left are part of this power game, and I think you're kind of playing into exactly what he's describing. I also think that it's inappropriate to try to ask Dean Slaughter to renounce any desire to go to Washington. I think she'd be a fantastic politician, but then again, I like Joe Biden, so. So I was hoping you could explain.
I think Dean Slaughter would do very well in Washington. I just don't think she should use Princeton as her climbing ground and deny the kind of educational experiences that are needed here in the process.
What makes you think she's using it as a stepping stone?
But I also agree with you. I have not provided you the facts that you need. Time doesn't permit that today, but I'd be very glad to take up Dean Slaughter's offer. Let's in fact do a content analysis of all the forums, all the foreign policy forums that the Woodrow Wilson School has sponsored since, let's just take 2001 as our starting point. But that can't be done solely by the Dean and the Woodrow Wilson School. That's going to have to be done by a bunch of independent analysts who are going to have to look at this in a serious, scholarly, academic, objective way. It's going to have to be properly funded. It's going to have to be properly set up. The Dean said she accepts the challenge. Let's see what she does about it.
We've got 3 minutes. Go.
Yeah, may I suggest the people on the podium make their answers shorter?
Yes, excellent point.
That's number one. Number two, before the war in Iraq, and I say Iraq because I'm verbally imperfect and politically incorrect, but anyway, I think we used to say Iraq. In 2002, the peace movement in this town had a protest in the streets, and we had about 30 people there. And then 2 months ago, we had another protest. Now, in 2002, 20% of the population in this country was against the war, and 80 were in favor of the war. Now, the statistics are exactly reversed, and only 30 people showed up again. And all we were armed with was a bunch of candles. Now, we have some very well-written people up on the podium, and maybe for people like me that are verbally imperfect, we could move this dialogue from this nice warm room where you're falling asleep out into that cold street with some placards. And if you have some point of views, which I think are great, let's get them out in the street and out of this room. And we can see the impact that Cindy Sheehan has had as far as the peace movement, and there's a lot of other things right here that we discussed. One of them I'd like to see is the $1 trillion accounting error that the Pentagon has. But anyway, that's my personal what I want.
Let me just say this quickly. I think to keep in mind, in September, my brother, let me just look at you while we're talking. Could you come to me? Sure. I like this. Socratic dialogue has a visual dimension to it.
Say what? I don't hear you.
I say Socratic dialogue has a visual dimension. I like to look in your eyes, and you look in my eyes, because it's Windows eyes of the soul. Windows of the soul. But the thing is this, that in September, over 400 of us were arrested in front of the White House, including Cindy Shane. Primarily Jews, Muslims, Christians. It was a very deeply religious delegation. No coverage other than our dear sister Cindy Sheehan. That's taking it to the streets. We were in jail for 13 hours. It's a long time, but I've got a lot of reading done in dialogue, but still. That's action. See what I mean? Now that ought to serve as wind at one's back to other fellow citizens who are not simply changing their minds, but also accenting the rights and liberties that are the result of unbelievable sacrifice and service on behalf of foremothers and forefathers who are citizens that keep the fragile democratic experiment alive. So when I hear what you're saying, taking the streets, yes, it's already taken place. Sometimes we know about it, sometimes we don't. But there are a number of fellow citizens of all colors and genders and sexual orientations who have already done precisely what you're saying in the name of public interest and common good.
Well, and I know, and we had one in New York in 2003, and they said 100,000 people showed up. Well, I'm telling you, there were 1.5 million there. The streets were crowded from downtown up into the 70s, and I wouldn't go in because I have a breathing problem, so I went as far as the 60s. But we had at least 1 million people there, and the news wouldn't report anything. So I know what we're up against, brother. I hear you.
But you've also been that sheriff. There's been that sheriff, my brother.
Be out in the streets as much in the cold with nice written placards by gentlemen like yourself who write very well, not like myself. You've never seen my writing. And more of it, as much as possible. And Princeton seems to be a kinder, gentle town, so we could get away with more, maybe.
Okay. There's a flashing from Fox News that there are 14 people in this room. We have time for 2 more questions, I'm afraid. Sir.
Mine's a 2-part question. The first.
Oh, no. 1-part question.
All right. Then just for Dr. Bajanski. Maybe I'm too much of a realist, but is it too much to assume that in order to enact in truly intellectual policies, that we have to engage a government that might not be as pure as we would like it in terms of corruption and special interests? It seems like that in order, from your stance, that in order to truly make a difference or truly to make pure to our ideals, we have to abandon a government that is very much realist and at times bogged down by issues of corruption.
Well, that's your definition of the government. It's not my definition of the government. I went to Washington after Princeton and after NYU Law School. I've never seen a government less competent, more duplicitous, more creating its own environment through more deception and more propaganda. I've never seen anything like this in Washington, and that seems to be the general consensus, frankly, among a lot of people, whether you hear it or not on Fox News.
There's been a lot of talk tonight about rigorous and grilling debate. And yet all I saw that weekend of the 75th anniversary celebration was the university's just totally fawning embrace of one of the chief architects and propagandists for a war that's totally unjustified in a war of aggression. So there seems to be a real disconnect between that desire for debate and the kind of thing we see in this newsletter, which repeats what was on the university website, which didn't even acknowledge the protesters. So I guess my question is, are we going to see in the next issue of this Woodrow Wilson newsletter a point-by-point rebuttal of Secretary Rice's speech? That would go a long way, I think, to having a real debate, which we're not having. There were 100 protesters, kept outside Jadwin Gym, yelling and screaming, I don't call that rigorous, solid debate. The university is just not promoting that. And especially with an administration that refuses to engage in debate. What's wrong with saying to them, no, we don't want you. Go find your VFWs and your red state audiences. If you want to speak to us, you'll have to engage us in real questions. And I don't think, and I see that that would be real, begin to turn the tide against this complacency and this acceptance of this administration. Not a question, a statement.
I guess I'm the only one still standing.
Okay,
so.
last person standing.
We have just two more?
This are very similar.
Well, maybe we can have all three right in a row.
Right quick.
All right. My quick question is that from what the three of you have said, that there seems to be two different ways of looking at this. One is Princeton for the Princetonian students who are here and fostering debate on campus among the students, and one is Princeton and the rest of the world. And especially what you were saying, sir, about how all of the seminars and things in Washington are repeated over and over the same sort of, blah, blah, not real debate. Whereas for us, we aren't in Washington, so when we get to have, Condoleezza Rice come here, does that foster debate on campus among the students? And what do you think is more important in terms of what you said, Dean Slaughter? Is it more important to have those people come and let that foster debate among the students, or is it more important to have the personality be engaged on stage and shown that, and debated with them personally? Is it more important for Princeton to engage them, or is it more important for Princeton to engage amongst itself and for the students to, then go out to the rest of the world?
A lot of things that we'd like to know, we don't know. A lot of things that should be transparent at this university aren't. I would hope the dean was serious, that she does want to pursue these things, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't expect to hear about it. I don't expect the things we've discussed that might happen here are going to happen here. I think pretty much after this forum, things will go back to normal with a little bit of some other speaker will be invited and some attempt will be made to say that there's balance, but the forces that be are pretty strong. They know what they're doing. They're going to continue to do it.
That's a little cynical, don't you know? It's called realism. No, I'm a deep Democrat. I don't believe that.
Socratic realism.
No, but sentimentalism is the bank holiday of cynicism. I'm neither sentimental nor a cynic. I'm a Democrat. I'm a blues man. So that I hear what you're saying. The challenge is strong, but the kind of Socratic activity, though not as much as we'd like, taking place among students as well as faculty, does lead me to think there's still a chance that a change can come about. There's still a chance that some kind of transformation can come about, and there's certainly still a chance that Anne-Marie Slaughter, as Dean Woodrow Wilson, can play a fundamental role in that regard. I still have that kind of faith, which is not a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. It's a real democratic sense that we have a capacity, if we do what it takes. Princeton will never be able to serve the nation or the nations of the world well unless it serves its students with Socratic challenge. That's the fundamental end and aim. And it is not Socratic method. It is an art. That's very different. It's not a tool to deploy. It's not an algorithm to use or a formula to follow. It's a self-invested, self-involved mode of inquiry that constitutes a way of life, and we're about the art of questioning. That's very different in that sense, you see. And that's, in the end, the raw stuff of democratic expansion and refinement and so forth.
So I agree with that last sentence. One of the things I certainly carry away with me is a sense that we do want to create, as in response to the last question, more opportunities for genuine debate. Even if we'd had the half hour we thought we had with Secretary Rice, it still would have been better to have a kind of conversational format where people pose questions. So I think I take that away, and I also want to reiterate what I started with, which is that I'm very pleased that this forum was organized. I think there need to be more like this. The most uncomfortable moment of the night was the request that I disavow any desire to go to Washington. And I've been sort of mulling, why was that so uncomfortable? I have no shame at all about saying that, yes, at some point I hope that I can be in government, and I hope that I can be in a position where I'm contributing to foreign policy. I came to Princeton because that's what I wanted to do, and I went to the Woodrow Wilson School because that's what I wanted to do, and I went to law school because that's what I wanted to do, and then I ended up practicing law, and I didn't like that so much, so I ended up in academia. But there is no shame in saying you want to serve the nation in foreign policy or in domestic policy in any way. Indeed, we seek to encourage that in all of you. Not that you should all go into government, but you should serve in some way, and if you want to serve in government, that is a wonderful thing. So I have absolutely no reason not to say that is something that I hope to do. So why was that such an uncomfortable and inappropriate question? Because there's an accusation there that is not about ambition. Ambition is fine. It's about integrity. It's about whether or not you are improperly using something in the service of your ambition. Now that is a serious charge, and one, if true, would be very serious indeed, and something, it would be a very serious charge. And I think what has been good about this evening has been, from my point of view, being able to hear things, as I did when you asked your question, that I had not heard before in the same way, and I understand how that looks to you in a way I frankly had not. And the point about Fallujah, where I actually heard something and understood how something I intended one way sounded to another. And I'll think about that. It may change my behavior. Even if it doesn't change my behavior, I've learned something valuable. That's what's good about tonight. That's what we need more of. That's what we need more of in the country in terms of real debate. It's very important to have that kind to be able to have that kind of a debate, to avoid ad hominem attacks, and more deeply to not presume good faith until good faith has been disproved. That's what I meant when I said I thought it was valuable for people at least to see and hear people they strongly disagree with. Because in my experience, many of those people, not all, and there's certainly limits to your amount of tolerance, but many of those people that I disagree with incredibly strongly on policy issues are not bad people. They are people trying to do what they think is right by their lights. We have zones of disagreement, but it's not about their integrity, their good faith, their efforts to actually, in many cases, accomplish the same goals that I have, but by different ways. That, to me, is what we have lost in this country so fundamentally, which is the ability in Washington, in the public, in the media, to debate on the issues and actually presume good faith, which it's much less dramatic. I mean, I could bring you all to your feet with a raving attack. It's much less dramatic to actually engage in that kind of debate, but ultimately it's necessary and it's important. Your kind of attacks on the personal side have no place in that debate, but the issues you raise, the students raise about What is the role of a university? When should you invite a public figure? When should that be beyond the bounds? Because there's certainly some public figures I would never invite. Those, I think, are very legitimate issues. I'm very pleased to have had the chance to debate them. I take things away, so that makes it a valuable evening. I will absolutely participate and sponsor similar evenings. I'm looking up at Janet Dickerson in the Office of Student Life. I hope we see many more of these. And I hope that the Woodrow Wilson School is a place where as many different voices can be heard, and I hope we can make it a place of more actual Socratic, sustained debate. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming. Thanks to the organizers and great thanks to the panelists.
The students, okay. So good to have you.